I have a dark confession to make. Prior to doing a little bit of listening and research for this band, I realized that my knowledge was not dense. It wasn't deep. It was something that honestly had a lot of loose ends. So this was a really cool journey, and I enjoyed doing this, and I'm thankful that this got requested to me. Behemoth is a group that in the past 10 years has received numerous amounts of acclaim, with the most recent one being named one of the albums of the decade for the Satanist, which is going to be on this list, trust me. I'm not sure if I would put it in that position. However, the band has certainly gained so much acclaim that they are almost becoming a heavy metal household name. But this has been true for a lot longer than actually speculated. This has been something that has been known, but a little bit more in the underground stance, for more than 20 years. These guys have been an institution. And it was really interesting to find out, whenever I first got into this band back in 2004, that they had numerous albums prior to the ones that I was listening to. But it just was always kind of hard to find. Well, now I had the opportunity to listen to them all, and we're going to rank them all. This is going to be a little bit of a rugged list. It's probably one that's not going to fit the conventions of the typical Behemoth fan. This is going to be more subjective than objective. So I want to hear and see what your lists are in the comments box below. So please do that while I rank them all Behemoth. And we start with number 11, which is Zoskia Cultus. This is one of the first albums by this band that I heard, and it's interesting that it's not grown into some sort of sentimental favorite like so many other first albums that I listened to. But this is a disc that whenever I started listening to the remainder of Behemoth's discography all together in order to sort of let my head be awash of all of this material, this one just felt like it had a lot of inconsistencies to it. It was one that felt like it had great ideas and were trying to have this band sort of shine the spotlight on a bigger stage with a bigger label and things like that, but just came off as a bit confused. This was a disc that had a lot of great efforts and a lot of great tracks, but for me, it's the one that, comes up to the bottom. Number 10 is Pandemonic Incantations. We're going all the way back to the 1990s material, some of which is forgotten by modern fans. They really need to go back and check some of this stuff out. This was whenever the group was sort of teeter-tottering between death metal and a little bit of black metal from time to time, and this was kind of knowledgeable and happened a bit at the time, where bands seem to really tread that fine line between the two subgenres. This is a very early release, and it shows the somewhat immaturity of the band, but at the same time presents them as a very powerful showcase of what these genres were set to become, and that Behemoth itself was a band that had all of the potential in the world to become a large-scale product. It is by no means a predictor of what we would to get from this band in the 2000s and especially the 2010s, but it did show that this band was talented and skilled enough to really make an initial impression that, was able to paint the picture that they could be future stars. Number 9 is Satanica, another album that's able to display this, and one that showed the band trying to experiment a bit near the end of the millennium. And this is an album that does have some pretty neat ideas that are attached to it. But again, with some of these lower end albums, the commitments to memory is where it kind of becomes a bit jaded. For some, these are priceless gems, the albums that immediately come to mind whenever mentioning the band, and whenever other albums are mentioned, they immediately groan. But this is a disc that for me just kind of hit me, but not very hard. It was almost like getting a week left after getting the roundhouse kick or the roundhouse punch of other albums on this list. But still one that is worthy of exploration, as it's an interesting product. Number 8 is Sventevith, or Storming Near the Baltic. I totally just bastardized the first word of that, but again, this is great. I like this album a lot. This was one that I didn't expect to sit down and enjoy as much as I did, but I did simply because of the power and the youth and the ability for this band to really impress upon me that them becoming who they are is not necessarily a surprise. It's not a secret. This was not something that was really all that secretive. They were showing glimmers of this from the very beginning, and I enjoy that. Going back and listening to Behemoth's past was a pleasure, considering you kind of see and hear it as a bit of a forgotten element of their discography, and whenever you listen to it, you kind of wonder why. Was it a bit derivative of the age? Did it feel like a lot of other bands that were coming across in the 1990s? It did. But it makes the evolution and the changeover and what they've become all the more impressive. And the material was no slouch either. They definitely had skill from the start. Number 7 is Thelamus 6, and this is a interesting release, one of the first that I naturally heard, and one that I liked, I think, a lot more in retrospect. This was more of the sentimental pick that eventually did not become the sentimental pick. It sort of fell out of favor with me a little bit as time has passed. Mostly because this was an album that felt like it was showing the band off to a larger audience. They, at that point, had moved, I believe, to Century Media Records, or at least one of its subsidiaries at the time, so it was getting a lot more promotion. They were getting a lot more face time, and as a result, this band was able to step up to the plate, but not necessarily hit a home run. Instead, it felt like they hit a double, that they tried to extend to a triple, but were over-ambitious and got thrown out. If you don't like the baseball metaphor, I don't know what to tell you. I know that Waterblanc will probably request a Merzbow song because of it. But as a result, this album just felt a bit flat in the overall, but is still one of those treasured albums that you remember from your heavy metal past. Number 6 is Grom. Again, another early album that feels like it has a lot to offer. And this one showcases it even more so with the strength of the material, because the band now is starting to mature and understand some things that it is very good at, and understand the things that is a bit more of a weakness of themselves. And they are working on things specifically in order to handle that. As a result, this felt like a complete effort, and from their early stages, that completion was very important. It gave them a lot to sort of build off of in the future. And as a result, Grom feels like not so much a sort of launch point for this band, but it feels like an album that showed other labels, bigger labels, that they were a band that was worth taking on. And as a result, within the next couple of years, they were getting better offers and were being showcased and displayed on other labels. Number 5 is The Apostasy. This is a late 2000s album that was coming after a couple of successes that were preceding it. It really helped Behemoth get onto the map. And The Apostasy is one of the first of those that was able to display that this band was slowly but surely transitioning into something a little bit deeper than what they were showing on their earlier material, such as Thelamus 6 or Zoskia Cultus. They definitely did not have that same makeup and wanted to expand as a band to showcase a little bit more atmosphere, to build more depth, and to utilize everything that they had within their arsenal to make an album that felt more like an experience and less like just music. And as a result, The Apostasy, I can recall being an album that a lot of the younger metal fans were really starting to attach to, and Behemoth was slowly but surely starting to become a sleeping giant, similar to their name. Number 4 is Evangelion, and this is yet another one of those very same albums, similar to The Apostasy, which is further showing the evolution of this band, which is further displaying exactly what it is that they were set to become. These were the initial stones that were being thrown, sort of tossing them into the water to see how the ripples were able to really display. You know, are the fans going to be behind this? It doesn't matter, because this is what we're going to do. We want to build an experience. We don't want to just build an album. And they were able to do this. They were able to add a lot more. They still kept trademark philosophies, but they built upon them instead of simply resting on their laurels. And as a result, Evangelion is yet another album that was heralded. Another album that was seen as extremely important. And one where now you see these as weaker than some of the others, but at the time were perhaps being seen as the top of the top. That's how powerful the run that this band has had over the past decade has been. Number 3, as I was trying to say before, is I Loved You at Your Darkest. The most recent Behemoth album, and one that followed up the success of another disc we're going to talk about, and was able to do some things that divided some fans, but I really enjoyed. They went all the way back to some of the elements of their past and were able to employ that on this album alongside the current ideals that they have represented and became. And I think this combination made for a very nice compilation that is actually just a studio album. And I like that idea, considering Behemoth has so many strong ideas that have pervaded throughout the years that it is kind of cool whenever you see a band go back and write in that former style and see that they still really love that genre and that style. And the combination of the two felt very natural. And as a result, I Loved You at Your Darkest has this great instantaneous magnetism to it that draws you back and makes you want to listen to it once again. Now, some were very harsh on this album because it was trying to fill shoes that were extremely large, and I think that was slightly unfair. I like the combination of efforts here, and I enjoyed this album quite a bit. If we disagree, we disagree. Number 2 is Demigod. This might come as a left field tackle, but this was one that I just really enjoyed whenever it first came out, and one that was sort of constantly the Behemoth album I returned to whenever I had the itch to listen to them. For some reason, this album just had a raw ferocity to it that was very well produced and reflected, but still just had a lot of power behind it. This is a great album that displayed that Behemoth wasn't quite at the transition point that we were just talking about with albums such as Evangelion, either that or the Apostasy, but they were moving there, and this was a great sort of farewell to their past. And it was a great display that was able to net them also a good number of fans, so they were able to bring in some new metal fans to the Youth Manifesto, if you really want to go that deep within the lore. It's an interesting idea. It's a great album. It's one that I still return to this day. It's almost like the first choice, but we can't ignore number 1. We can't ignore the Satanist. We can't ignore the fact that whenever this disc came out, it was a mind blower. Has it been overblown to its real power? Maybe so. That's, again, a very subjective question. But this was an album that whenever it dropped, immediately dropped jaws and turned heads. It showed Behemoth had arrived completely. The journey that they had begun with albums such as the Apostasy and with Evangelion had now borne the fruit of the complete Behemoth experience. The one that felt like it was the tightest, that had the best material, and was executed in a second-to-none capability that only could be done by Behemoth. This was the star-making album. Not the album that necessarily brought them to the dance. Not the album that showed them off to a number of new fans. This was the one that was the star maker, that made them a name that immediately has been on the tips of tongues ever since its release. Be it in positive, negative, or neutral light, Behemoth is now a name known by many within the heavy metal realm. You could seldom find someone who does not know this band. Unless, of course, they're mainly on the fringe, and even some of they are well aware of what Behemoth has been able to accomplish, and it's been because of the Satanist. This album is transcending for this group. It's one that was able to grant them acclaim that previously had somewhat eluded them, but it was one that felt even more magnified. And it's of course been magnified to the nth power with being rated as the album of the decade by certain publications. Again, whether or not you agree with this is a matter of subjective taste, but you have to admit that even if it's not your number 1 of the decade, it's still a damn good album, and definitely the best of the best from Behemoth. And that's our list. What's yours? Is it in the comments box below yet? If not, get working on it. I've enjoyed talking about all of these bands this week, and I hope that you'll continue to stay tuned. I'm CoverKillerNation. Take care.